Hey everybody, I hope you guys are enjoying the holidays and spending every opportunity you can with your friends and family. I wanted to update you guys with this video here and finally talk about our budget greenhouse and basically how we made it and how we made it more durable, considering the fact that this greenhouse started off as a probably $150 to $200 Amazon greenhouse kit. And now the reason we opted for this option as opposed to a more permanent, larger structure is because this entire property here that we are farming off of and running our nursery from is temporary. None of this we actually own. Of course, our goal is to one day own something, own a piece of land, and build our nursery more permanently on it. But for the time being, this is more than enough. But we did need a solution. We needed some sort of structure in order to be able to raise up our young seedlings and a lot of our more tender plants in a protected environment, especially through not only the really hot temperatures in the summer, but of course the really cold temperatures in the winter. So we needed a structure that we were able to have some sort of control over the climate inside. Now, considering that and considering the fact that everything had to be temporary, we opted for this option here because I had an idea to improve upon it. And so far, I'd say maybe 90% of my improvements worked as intended. And I want to share that with you guys because in the event that you're looking to build a greenhouse or a hoop house on a budget, I think this is a really good option if these dimensions suit your needs. So this greenhouse in front of us is 20 feet long by 10 feet wide by probably around 6.5, 7 feet tall. So these are pretty standard. Ours specifically is a Vevor brand greenhouse, but you can find pretty much the same exact one by several other brands. They pretty much all come from China, and they are very, very cheap kits. That should not be understated. They're pretty garbage, if I'm being honest. But let me go over what I did to enhance this greenhouse and actually make it probably comparable in quality. Our neighbor here built an excellent greenhouse. It's 100 feet long, and we kind of use it as a reference there. But I believe it was from an actual kit, and it had, good quality thick steel pipes that were bent into their shape. And now the kit here, these kits, it'll probably be easier to see from the inside, but you can see the bolts there. None of this steel, the longest any piece was here was maybe 3 or 4 feet long. So most of this is just a bunch of different pieces and fragments that are bolted together. So one of the first things we had to address with this greenhouse was the rigidity, the structural integrity. Because out here in this field, and just in this part of North Carolina, we receive really strong winds, and we do get tropical storms, and more rarely hurricanes. Even tornadoes are a possibility, but basically any type of natural disaster or inclement weather can really pose a risk to greenhouses out here in these open fields. So we needed something that could not only resist the winds, but of course, hold its shape and not just blow away. So we had to anchor it in the ground as well as keep it together. And this is going to be easier to see when I open this door here and show you guys what we did to accomplish that. So the first thing that you'll be able to see, you might have seen from the outside here, I did reinforce the corners of this greenhouse at the very bottom. Because this whole greenhouse, once it was assembled and put together with just the metal frame, it had a lot of wiggle to it. It was not very tight. And so from the corners, I wanted to reinforce those first. And then at the center, where they meet the actual bar that runs across and holds the greenhouse together, not only is everything bolted, but we also found these U-shaped rebar kind of hoops. Each one is probably about a foot, foot and a half long, and these are hammered all the way deep into the ground and holding everything tight in there. And now these hoops aren't just in the front and back there, but they're all around this greenhouse. There's probably close to 20 of them, if I had to guess, all around here, holding this into the ground. On top of that, all of the pipe at the bottom of this structure is also buried. And on top of that, when we put the plastic on, that was also buried. So not only is it thoroughly staked into the ground, but it's also buried and reinforced by the earth itself, which really helps give us a stable grounding here. Now, that's not the only reinforcements I did on the inside. This piece in particular made a really big difference here. And this is something I would recommend. In addition to the other reinforcements I made, this one seems to be one of the more important ones for the center here. Because since this is such a long structure, the center in particular was a weak point. So what we did is we ran a 4-foot piece of rebar into the ground about halfway, slid this, and these pipes I used, by the way, these are conduit, because they closely match the diameter of the really cheap pipe that they sent me. This electrical conduit right here, it might be 3/4 inches thick, and it's easy to find for cheap at Lowe's or Home Depot or any other home improvement store. So we ran that and slid it over the rebar in the center here, so this is firmly anchored into the ground. And then we ran a piece across that connected to these sides, and pretty much everything you can tell is reinforced and held together by a little metal wire. So you could tell this was done for pretty cheap. I could have done that a lot better, but the wire has seemed to held up good enough. And of course, it might be a concern in these areas where it's rubbing against the plastic. I could have shaved those down a bit or covered them with something, or even reinforced the plastic with a little tape. But so far it's done okay. And you can see even with this reinforcement, there's still, you can see that color there, get that focus, there's still about an inch of play there. So this does still shift in the winds, but that's after reinforcing. So it holds up a lot better, and you do want some play. You don't want this to be, I guess, completely rigid given the circumstances. You want a little bit of mobility so there's not too much pressure on certain joints, but that's still pretty good. And again, you can see inside here now, look at all those pieces, all those bolts the whole way. That's not a solid pipe. That's several pieces that are maybe 3 feet in length. And same goes for the hoops above here. Those are segments all bolted together. Now inside here, I'm pretty proud of how this looks because it looks pretty legitimate. But I will say the reinforcement I did here, we hit our head on this many times. That's the only thing. I mean, if you had a taller structure, I mean, then again, if you had a taller structure, it might not be under $200, but you know, for this one, that was a trade-off we had to make in order to make sure that this thing didn't fall apart. So I had to reinforce it. This was the best I could come up with just on the fly, and it worked pretty well. It took away a little bit of mobility in here. I did get used to ducking under this now. And there is upward space here if we ever wanted to hang some plants or something. But as you can see, I did hang these circulating fans from here, and that did pretty good. But in terms of reinforcements, that's most of what we did is those pipes there, plus the water barrels that I added here, which are more for thermal regulation and kind of storing the heat from the sun during the day so that at night it's warmer here, especially in the winter. That's primarily what we want that for. But these barrels also help to reinforce these hoops too and give it added rigidity. And I feel like this model is something I would probably slightly alter, but replicate in the future because I want to make eventually another cheap greenhouse and just fill it with these fruiting trees and have something more for the produce side of our business where we could just have fruiting citrus trees, whereas these are also for fruiting. Our Thomasville's looking great there. But these are also to be mother trees. So these are going to be ones that we take budwood from and graft out so we have future nursery stock. But anyway, that's inside here. I want to get to the next point, which is the plastic that we used here. Because the original plastic that these come with is not very good quality. It's terrible, actually. And again, it's a very cheap kit. At best, it's probably meant more for temporary, like use it a year at a time. But we wanted to make a more, a hardier greenhouse from this kit. So what do? We replaced the plastic, the brittle plastic it came with. And the main complaint about that plastic was its UV resistance, which the sun is so strong out here. I mean, it would be in pieces by the end of the year. So I went on farmplasticsupply.com and I got this long roll of plastic. I forget if it was like 50 feet long or something, just to give me enough to cover the 20 feet and the 10 or so on each side and still have some excess for any repairs. But basically, that long roll of plastic replaced the previously perfectly fitting plastic with doors and windows and everything. So that created some challenges. And in order to get this plastic on here and mounted, you might have noticed, we had to use wiggle wire, which Vevor also had on their store. They had these U-channels and the wiggle wire. And we got a nice kit of that where we were able to run this along the whole way, 20 feet on each side, as well as the additional probably 20 feet or so of this hoop here. Because this hoop also has the U-channels bolted on here. So that allowed us to mount the plastic all the way around and super tight and secure. And it was a very windy day when we did this, so it was actually really challenging. But we got it on. A few rips and tears, but we did have some tape to fix the plastic. And it's on great. Now, doing the ends wasn't so bad originally, because we had that ends which has no door on it, and you can see that little hole we patched up. And then we have this one that eventually we did put the door on. And we had to do that in the same day, of course, because then I had no way of accessing the greenhouse after both end caps were on. The solution for the door, which I kind of copied from the original design, was a zipper door. And Farm Plastic Supply also had these nice little zippers that stuck onto the plastic and allowed you to make a door and kind of cut it right in place once it's stuck on. So you basically just stick this already zippered on here, and then you unzip it and cut it down the middle, and you have a door. The thing I noticed, though, is after a year, pretty much exactly, of having this on, the adhesive gave up. It no longer worked at all, especially after experiencing the cold, I think is what did it. And so we had no way of attaching our door on here anymore. And I didn't really feel like taking this all apart and redoing it. Not now, at least. But if I had to go back in time, I probably just would have made an actual door frame and a door for here. I just didn't want to do all that work. Again, this is a budget greenhouse. We're trying to keep it as cheap as possible. So I was already in $150 or $200 for the greenhouse itself, maybe another $100 for the plastic, and then, what was it, $20 for the zipper door stuff, maybe another $20 for the conduit and wire. And we're looking at a pretty cheap build here. I think it came in under $400 or $500 altogether with everything, which is really amazing, but I didn't want to spend even more money on the door, so you might see now it's a pretty temporary hold, but I had put some pieces of tape here because it was really windy, and I was just slapping it wherever I could to hold it together. And then eventually I came around with my stapler, and I just stapled this onto the plastic. And I don't know how long term these staples are gonna hold up here, but it was a temporary solution. It worked, and I can't fully recommend it, but if you want to go this route, I would recommend stapling it when you first put it on, at least, so you don't have to do this later and mess it up and, well, make a mess of it like I did. But it's working right now, and maybe this will hold up another year or two. We'll see when the time comes for that. But it's working good so far, and if I had to go back in time and if you were to do this project, I'd recommend going a little different route than I did with the door. It will be more difficult than just putting the plastic on, but you could always put the original plastic on and then put better plastic over it. I suppose that's always an option, and then you can keep the original door. It might be a little more complicated than that, but it's an idea. It's something you can try, but this worked for the time being, and maybe you know of a better way of securing a zipper door than I do. This is our first time with a project like this. But anyways, so we have the reinforcements, we have the plastic, the staking down, the wiggle wire. So you can see those improvements we made. And the last part is, well, the original one had some sort of, I don't want to call it a shade cloth, but it had some sort of fibers in the plastic that did give it some sort of effect of a shade cloth, maybe like a 20 or a 30%. But I eventually put my own shade cloth over this, and you can see it's just held on with these clips here, nice and easy. And I put this here because in the summer it got way too hot in here. And while I could have undone the plastic here with the wiggle wire and brought that out and kind of curled it up so we got some ventilation in there, I didn't quite feel like it. In all honesty, I was just feeling a little lazy with that. So I had the fan circulating, I had the door open, and of course I got a 50% shade cloth here, which now actually I'm quite glad I did because everything in there is growing really, really well, even with the 50% shade cloth. It keeps the temperatures a lot more moderate. Even in the summer, it still gets very hot, but not nearly as hot. And a lot of the plants actually grow quite well even with the 50% shade cloth. And you can see we still had citrus fruiting in there, even with that much shade. But they also got a lot of heat too, so that can also affect things. But I mean, that's a testament for citrus tolerating shade too, by the way, is they can take quite a good deal of it, and I can attest to 50% being just fine for them. But we put the shade cloth on here, and it's actually helped a lot with managing things. And I did have this fully over in the summer, even blocking the barrels there, but now I have it fully exposed so the barrels are able to absorb a little more energy from the sun. And some of you might have noticed the barrels are white. That's just what we were able to get for cheap. You know, I could have gone through more effort and painted them black, or at least painted half of them black. But I don't have that kind of time. A lot of this stuff, and that goes for a lot of the things out here, a lot of it might seem simple and easy, but when you work full time and you're, you know, if this is either a side project or this is a business for you too, if you're doing something similar, you just don't have the time to do everything the way you might want to. If I had unlimited time and resources, I might not even be doing this budget greenhouse. I'd probably be doing something different, but you know, things aren't always done perfectly, and I'll get questions about some of that stuff, and you know, we just do the best that we can out here. The best that we can with the time and resources that we have. But so far, I've been really, really happy with how this greenhouse has worked out. Again, for the money invested in it, it's more than paid for itself in the amount of plants it's produced, the amount of plants it's protected, because in both the past winters, we've seen 17 degrees and 15 degrees, and it hasn't dipped much below freezing. I think the lowest we've ever seen is 31 degrees in the greenhouse, which is amazing considering that it's seen below 20 so many times. And that's largely to do, again, with those water barrels that we have in there. But even just in general, just having a protective structure helps a lot. And especially in a windy field like this, that protection from the winds can be critical in the wintertime too. So that alone is very, very valuable. But this greenhouse has done great. I'm really proud of it for what we put into it. And I hope this can serve as some sort of template for some of you who are looking to do something similar on a similar budget. I'm sure, and I've double checked, most of the materials, I mean, I only built this like around a year ago. Most of the materials should be a very similar price to what I'm saying in this video. If you were to build this exactly the way I did, you'd be in less than $500 for a very durable greenhouse. I mean, compared to the other greenhouses that I've seen from the kits, I think I've gotten as close as I can for having started with an Amazon greenhouse kit. Again, the metal's terrible, the plastic's terrible, but if you can reinforce it properly, put some better plastic, some better shade cloth, just kind of enhance it, you can really make these work very nicely for whatever your purposes are with this greenhouse. But for nursery production, this is doing just fine for us on our relatively temporary setup here. But I hope you guys found this information helpful. If you have any questions that I didn't cover in the video, please let me know in the comment section. But if you found this helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe. We do talk about things that aren't strictly related to citrus or plants in general, but sometimes just our greenhouse, for instance, or other topics like soil. There's other things I'd like to talk about, and maybe there's some other things you guys would like to learn that maybe I have some sort of knowledge about. I'm not the most experienced with everything, but I am very willing to learn, and I'm always trying to learn. And I like to share that knowledge when I think I've done something kind of okay. So if this could be of any help to anyone else, and if I could present this in a digestible way, I would be very happy about that. So anyways, I look forward to hearing from you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. So bye-bye for now.